Welcome everyone to Mastering MicroStation DGN, how to integrate CAD and GIS. It is that time, so let's dive in and introduce our presenters today. I'll hand it over to Evie to introduce herself.
Hello, I am Evie, and I am a technical support specialist here at SAFE, and I specialize in the form product. And yeah, I'll hand it off to Jovita.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jovita Chan. I'm a technical support specialist as well, also on the form side. I've been around SAFE for about 6 years now, and I like to find myself in spaces of CAD and GIS. I do not have a swear jar next to me. If I dip into like Autodesk vocabulary, I am very sorry, but we will try to stick in MicroStation today. And welcome.
Excellent. Okay, so before we dive in, if you are new to the Livestorm platform, if you have any audio issues during the webinar, just click that help button on the bottom left. There's 4 simple steps to take. Share your emoji reactions with us during the webinar with that react button on the bottom middle. We have multiple polls coming up as well, so keep an eye on that polls tab. Questions. Also, various points that will stop to answer any key questions there. And we also have Dave joining us on the back end, so he'll be helping us out with questions throughout the webinar. And then lastly, the chat, keep letting us know where you're tuning in from there and leave any comments during the webinar. If you'd like to download the deck right now, you're welcome to. You can just click the download button on the top right of the PDF there. It's also under apps and handouts, so you can find it there as well. All right, so this is a good time. I'll get our presenters to turn off their webcams just to save on some bandwidth for the remaining bit of the webinar here. And with that, I'll hand it over to Evie to go over our agenda.
Yeah, so our agenda today is a little bit of an introduction. I'll do a flash demo, then we'll get into some CAD to GIS and then GIS to CAD. Then we'll do some conclusion notes and resources and Q&A. So, to get started with a poll, what is your biggest challenge with CAD to GIS integration?
Awesome. I just published it there, and you can actually select more than one as well if more than one do stand out to you as challenges that you face. So give everyone a moment there.
I think managing complex data types is taking the lead here. There are a lot of complex data types in MicroStation, considering they're called complex chains.
All right, awesome. Thanks everyone for voting there. That definitely helps give us insight.
I think Michael's going to be happy about our presentation today on item types. And a couple of things we won't touch on, but we'll chat about a little bit.
Nice. So there is a better way. You shouldn't have to experience all those problems and challenges. What are you going to get out of this webinar? Let's see how FME can help you integrate DGN with GIS formats and applications. Here are some common barriers to integration with CAD to GIS. It is important to consider what is the data you are working with and what is the outcome you are looking for. Jovita, do you have anything to add?
With CAD and GIS, oftentimes working on one or the other, so kind of having knowledge of the both, I think is a point I forgot to add. It's kind of like CAD or GIS specific knowledge, so I would add that as well.
Yeah. We shall jump into our first demo, my flash demo. This is for anyone that is new to FME, might not have any experience with form. So I'm just going to show you here. This is what you first start out with. And I'm going to open a blank workspace. This is what you end up when you first open it. And you'll be excited to know that this is 2024. I'm going to import a file. I'm going to drag and drop the file onto the canvas here. And I'm going to click OK. There are some parameters here, but I'm going to leave it all the same because we will cover some of these later. I'm going to click OK, and it'll load it in. So this data I created myself. It is just a representation of some geometry. It's not real data, unfortunately. And I'm going to load that in. So this is separated by the different geometries, but if it wasn't, and you can see here the little preview at the bottom, the different points and lines here. You might want to separate this with a geometry filter if you're going to GIS. So if I put a geometry filter, just to show you what this looks like, I'm going to connect all of these to this input. And I'm going to select these geometries. If I run this, you'll see that they're all filtered out, even though I connected them all. So it's the same output, but slightly different.
I'll add that in this case, Evie's got some really kind of clean data already as we're working with example data. But in the case of data that you might be working with, they may not come so cleanly in lines, points, and polygon levels. And so that geometry filter lets you split out your geometries to get that into GIS for your feature classes or your shape files where it only allows one type of geometry.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so something that's important for GIS, a lot of formats like the geodatabase, which I'm going to write to here, is I'm going to write to this one. I'm going to name it. I'm just going to name it test. And I'm going to have automatic. But something that is different about file geodatabase is that it has to have a geometry. So point, polygon, line, and selected for each feature class. So if I select that one and then I write it out for points, I'm going to have to duplicate this or add another feature class to write out to the lines and areas. So I could just duplicate it. You can also add that in file, but I duplicate it here. And then I go into the lines and change it to polyline. And the areas, I change that to polygon. And that's the entire demo. So then if I run this, I'll preview this in the slides. Yeah, thanks.
So while that's loading, should we expect 3 geodatabases, or what do each of those writer feature types represent?
So since they're all to the same geodatabase, they will have separate feature classes, separate like layers, if you will. So if I go back to the slides here, this is what the geodatabase looks like. So they're all separate layers and they have each geometry level on a different one. So yeah, that's the data.
Excellent. So each of those geometries are a feature class, is that right, in that geodatabase?
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
Yes. Yeah, so here are some challenges that you may relate to. In that flash demo, I just wanted to go over that it is dependent on the output format that you want and what do you want in your outcome to be. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
and I think as some of you guys touched on in the chat, there's challenges transforming MicroStation elements, whether you're working with cells, whether you're working with annotations, dimensions, and different types of geometry, as well as how attribution is stored. So we're going to talk a little bit about item types, and we have some questions for you in terms of whether tags are still relevant, but I believe they have been replaced by item types. We can still work with tags if that is something that is needed. And then managing spatial awareness in terms of working with coordinate systems. If your data has been drawn, if in CAD to a coordinate system, it can be read in or set correctly, and it can be reprojected and kept into GIS. And then finally, we won't touch on this too much, but with FME, we're mostly focusing on form today, the other side being flow, which allows you to really scale up how you use your workspace and to automate it and let more users get the outcome of it without having to know how to create it. And that would be more about self-serve data and data validation. But we can talk about the data validation part today. I think it is somewhat represented in our demos today.
yeah, thanks, Jovita. Yeah. So moving on to CAD to GIS. What is the difference between CAD and GIS? So CAD, if you didn't know, stands for computer-aided drafting. And a drawing represents objects and real world with accuracy, symbology, styling, labels, and levels that can contain anything.
For sure. And out of curiosity, just from the audience, if you go to that React button there, how many of you are more aligned on like the CAD side? Like you're more comfortable with CAD? If you are, please give us a thumbs up. And if you're more of a GIS person, please give us like the person, like the ta-da emoji, like a little like, I don't even know what that is. It's like when it pops and you get confetti.
Yeah,
Perfect.
confetti.
I'm like, ta-da. But yeah, so computer-aided drafting, Evie, would you say is more from like a drawing perspective then that we're looking at in terms of how we represent the real world in a drawing?
Yeah, I think that a lot of drawings too, it really depends on your data, but a lot of them don't even have coordinate systems. And so it's really difficult sometimes to translate that to a GIS where coordinate systems are mandatory and the cleanness of data matters.
Yeah. So in a GIS kind of mindset, as Evie's mentioning, topology and like data connectivity matters because this is data that's going to be used for analysis and then further decision making, and location is key. So the G in GIS, the geographic part, is super important in terms of being able to make that analysis based on spatial data. We touched on this in the Flash demo, but also the way data is organized in GIS is a lot more structured in terms of having that unique geometry per file, such as shapefile, or feature class in a geodatabase. I think those are the specific ones that tend to have one type of geometry. So those are the kind of ones that stand out. But this is CAD and GIS, just to get your minds ready for this.
Yeah. So I'll hand it off to Jovita for this demo.
Sounds great. So our first demo we're looking at will be from DGN roads to shapefile. And the goal of this workspace is to enrich the data set with GIS information where our data is a little bit older. I found this file from possibly the previous webinar on MicroStation. Nobody look at the age of that. And this is a file where the attributes are actually stored in the line style. So at the top right there in that little screenshot, we have the style for 1 means loose road type, 2 paved, 3 rough. And we're going to add that as attributes so a lookup table isn't required. And at the same time to boot, just because it's easy, we're also going to upgrade our DGN file. So we are going to DGN from DGN to shapefile, but also to DGN V8. And we're going to keep those attributes as item types, just as a bit of a taster. So with that, we will head into a demo. So before I had a screenshot, I thought I'd look into Data Inspector, but now we will go into the actual workspace. So that was Data Inspector. You see kind of a preview of it in Visual Preview below where Evie was showing the part with the map. And this is our workspace from V7 to shapefile. So take a quick look at our data. And because there's a lot going on here, we're just looking at IGDS style. So I've got 1, somewhere in the middle here, 2, and 3 are different road types. And using an attribute value mapper, we can import our CSV table of these 3 lovely records into loose, paved, and rough. So we're setting these new attributes as strings rather than numbers, cleaning it up, and then writing it out to our shapefile. So something kind of fun here, and some of you may already recognize, is a writer feature type. And that's the ability to write multiple feature classes or files, depending on the format you're working with at the same time. And I'm splitting it off based on road type. So I'll go ahead and just rerun this entire workspace, and then we'll talk about that little bookmark on the bottom. Below, at the same time, we are creating item types. For those of you who remember tags, it was as lovely and simple as turning on a writer parameter. For item types, there's a minimum of 3 different attributes you need to create, and Evie will touch on that more later, so no need to memorize this. but this is just kind of 3 different things we set to create new attributes in order to create our item type road attribute with a property called road type. So let's take a look at our output. And this is, take a look in, let's be ambitious. We're going to open QGIS because I am currently running on a Mac. If it looks a little bit different to you, this is the Mac platform. And I am a big fan of dragging and dropping. So we'll put in our loose, our paved. And for shapefile, that writer feature fan out, feature type fan out, created 3 different shapefiles. A little bit hard to see. And this is somewhere in, I think, northwest of Victoria in Saanich area. So we've got our different roads. This is an older data set. So for folks who are from this area, this is outdated. But here we are. And then let's take a peek at our item types. And road V8 output, written today, 8:17 a.m. I'm gonna go ahead and copy this and locate MicroStation. Let me log in. Paste it in here. And we'll take a peek. Nobody judge the version of MicroStation I've got open. It needs a little bit of an upgrade. Give it a second. There we go. Got our road types here. And let's see. Plant properties. And there we have our item. Road type, road attribute is item type name, and road type is paved. So we'll head back into our slides from here. So that was a quick workspace going from DGN V7 to shapefile and also writing DGN V8 with item types. And something that was really useful here was that attribute value mapper, just allowing us to use a lookup table to enrich the actual data set with the attributes instead of having an external lookup table. The feature type fanout was really useful in order to create different layers, well, not really layers, 3 different files. So you could see loose, paved, and rough. So this is a screenshot of the data inspector or FME data inspector, where you can turn on and off those layers. And perhaps for some reason you would like to just have a data set of only loose type paved roads or loose type road types. And then lastly, we were creating attributes for item types there. With that, I will pass it over to Evie.
Thanks, Jovita. Yeah, so this demo is about topo map, and we're parsing the data. Here we have a data set with labels and geometry, and we want to work in GIS to go from DGN to GIS. The key here is the neighbor finder, the attribute filter, and the geometry filter, again, what I showed previously. And we are going to write to a geodatabase. So this is what the data looks like in MicroStation. So we have some line geometry and labels next to the lines to say what the elevation is. We also have some points in green, and we will see that in the demo. So let's share my screen again. So this is what the completed workspace looks like, and I will zoom in so you can see it better. So first we start with the DGN output. So this is what it looks like. There's no schema because it is there, and it's not automatically exposed with FME, but you can see all the data is here, all the geometry. And you can see all of the unexposed attributes in the feature information window on the right here. And if we go to the attribute exposer, we can expose those attributes that we need. So the type, which gives us the line, text, point, ellipse, all of those information. And for any of the type text, we need to expose the text string so we get that information as well. So like this is the actual elevation. And then I'm going to use an attribute filter that is going to filter on the type whether it's an ellipse, a point, a text, a line. We're not going to use the ellipse, but we are going to use the point, the text, and the line. And then I'm going to use a neighbor finder, and that is going to match the labels to the nearest geometry. So the points to the text here, I'm going to match it for a maximum distance of 75, and it's based on your coordinate system. So if you don't have one, you should probably set that first. This does have a coordinate system, luckily, so which you can also see in the feature information window. And then I'm going to match all of the lines to the text as well, all of the text that wasn't already matched. And this is also to 75, and all of the ones that are matched, that are not matched yet from that 75, I put in another neighbor finder for a maximum distance of 500, just to catch all of the loose ones. But if that's not what you want, you can just leave those hanging as well and not write those out. And then I use an attribute manager to rename the type output attribute and the string output attribute to elevation. And I use a conditional value to 2 possible values. For all of the points, I use peak. And for all other lines, I use contour. And then I can use a geometry filter to filter out the lines and points again. This is to write to geodatabase. So that means that all of the peaks are going to be written out here, and all of the lines, the contour lines, are going to be written out to a separate feature class in the geodatabase. So that is my demo. You can see here all of the lines and points. You see here in the lines that all of the elevation points are, all of the elevation lines are, have the attribute here merged to it, and same with the points here. So yeah, so if we go back to the slides, this is what it looks like in ArcGIS Pro. So this is the data now, and you can see that they are separate layers here with the elevation as its own attribute. And it even writes out the object ID. You don't have to worry about that. And it creates the shape and the all of that information that's needed for a geodatabase feature class. Takeaways here are the neighbor finder is really important for this workflow. It's great for finding and joining attributes from nearby features. The attribute filter can also be used, but also the feature type filter, if you're filtering by feature type, the tester or the test filter could also have been used for the same workspace. There's no right answer. You can do whatever you want in FME and you can get the same output. And the geometry filter is used to create separate feature types based on geometry type for the geodatabase or shapefile as used previously.
Jumping in here, that's kind of a relief. Yeah. It takes off the pressure that you can use different transformers and like basically create your workspace a little bit differently in order to get the output you want. So there's no perfect correct answer, which is nice. I'm curious about that neighbor finder. In our example here, we were just looking for one attribute or one annotation to put onto the geometry. Would it work if I had like multiple types of annotations that I wanted to put onto the same geometry?
Yeah, if you had multiple, you could all put them into that input port, and then you could create a list instead, and it would output that for you in the feature information window, and you can expose that later. Yeah, so lots of different ways you could do this, whether you have multiple or only one. You could do lots of things with FME, lots of different answers.
Absolutely. And we didn't have it in this particular webinar, but we often talk about things like annotations in like a parcel or in an area. So we have lots of transformers like overlayers or like point on area overlayers that will grab that information, just like a more specific tool to use instead of like a catch-all. You've got more specific tools that you can use in FME.
Yeah, and one thing as well is that I ran into this earlier with a customer, is that you don't need to create the points for the text. In FME, text comes in with its own insertion point, so you don't need to do that as well. So that's why I didn't cover that. Okay, so on to the next demo, Jovita.
That's me. We will now be looking at reading item types from water mains and then writing to map info. We do love a good DGN reader talk. So in this workspace, we'll be looking at taking these attributes that have been, or item types, or attribution that's stored in DGN, and we want to enrich this data set for analysis. The problem with this particular data set, not necessarily a problem, but something that we can clean up pretty easily, is that we've got lots of small line segments with the same attributes, and they are basically the same line, and it could be better connected. So we will be creating longer lines based on that attribution and connectivity. And the key here is sort of just understanding where your item types are and what you're looking at. So typically, as you kind of saw in one of the earlier demos, it is the item type name dot property name. So that's kind of the attribute we're looking for in FME. And the result for this workspace will be map info tables broken down by installation date ranges. So we're going to take one of the attributes, we're going to create ranges of dates when these mains were installed, and we're going to output multiple map info tables. Here we are in FME Workbench. I'm going to click out of this zoom tool so I don't accidentally zoom very, very close in. So from here, I'd like to show the reader actually. So I'm going to go in. I can either hit reader up top or just start typing DGN. We are in FME 2024 with the release being yesterday. So do check that out. It looks a little different than previous versions because it is now gorgeous. And we're going to take a look at Bentley MicroStation V8. I'm going to pass the data set there for a second. And these are the reader parameters. When we are reading item types, we want to definitely check read X attributes and item type attributes. And this will allow us to just pull out those item types as attributes that I'll show momentarily. Typically, when I'm going to go off-roading here a little bit, typically when we're in the reader, there's a couple of things that are on by default. They aren't currently on because I opened this recently and I remembered, but things like expand named cells is typically turned on. So if you want your cells to come in as a geometry, then you would want to expand the name cells. It's going to drop, being a cell, it's going to be all of its parts that make up the cell, and that gives you all of the symbology if you want to have that geometry. If you don't want that, you want to turn it off and you're going to get in your cells as points. So we'll talk more about this later, but I just, because it's open, want to chat about now. So things to remember here, check read X attributes and item type attributes if you would like to read item types. Go ahead. Okay, and cancel out of here. So having gone through that reader parameter, I now have this reader feature type, which is in orange. I don't think we mentioned the colors earlier, but this orange is reader feature type, writer feature type, and our transformers are here in the middle. So if I take a peek at my data set, you can see metadata.installation date. I've got two different item types represented here, metadata and water main. And within these item types, I have different properties. So metadata just has the one, which is installation date, and water main's got three different, and I should stop sorting, clear all sorting. And water main's got three different properties. So some of the information we're looking at is the diameter or gauge, the lining material, and the material. I'll go ahead and run this entire workspace. And what we're doing here is that geometry filter that you're already familiar with, because familiarity breeds memory and helps with kind of learning. And what's interesting in this workspace is the line combiner. We are combining those line segments based on the same attributes. So if it's got the same diameter, the same lining material and the same material, I would like it, and it's touching, I would like it to become a longer line. So as you can see, my features came through. I began with 66,000 features, and now I have 19,000. So I'm gonna take a look again. I'm gonna zoom in on Stanley Park because it's kind of an easy and obvious one. But if you see these line segments, installation date 1930, cast iron, diameter of 150. And if I just kind of click through this, you can see that I still have 1930, 150 cast iron. So I don't, in GIS, I might not want these as separate line segments. And this line combiner, if I take a look at the output there, a little bit small, make it bigger. And as you can see now, I'm selecting this entire water main, which has the same attributes and the connectivity. So I now have just a more useful data set with less segments. And in the attribute manager, I used a conditional value in order to specify date ranges. And I did a writer feature type fan out on that, so we can see what we end up with. As we mentioned before with the feature type fan out, it depends on what type of format you're using with in terms of whether you get different feature classes of the same geodatabase, different tables of the same map info file, as well as whether it's maybe like a shape file, then you get different files. So let's go take a peek at this in the data inspector. I can type in my tab for short. Helps if I actually click it. And we're gonna look at our installation ranges. And here we are. So this data set and the previous data set, I did have known coordinate systems. The very first one, I did have to set the coordinate system. The second one, the data originally came from GeoJSON. So it wrote out the coordinate system and retained it, which is why we have a coordinate system here. And then we have our different data sets that we've output. So this is just our output to 1950, 1975, up till 2000, and then present. That will head back into our slides here then. So a recap on that one was about the reader parameters and just checking that item type, reading item types. Then we did some cleanup on topology for GIS and then extracted data for the purpose it's needed in, which for us, in this data set, we looked at installation dates. So before we flip over to GIS, from GIS to CAD, as we're still talking CAD to GIS, some key ideas to remember. And here's the screenshot with the actual wording for read X attributes and item type attributes V8 only. We talked about how to read item types and tags, not quite tags. We talked about how to read item types. And then finally, this is the part where I wanted to come back to about the reader parameters, cells. If you do not want it to be broken out of a cell and into its parts, its composite parts, you want to turn off expand name cells, which is under element options there on the right. Annotations will generally be split by default. So you want to go into the advanced parameters and turn that off if you do not want your multi-line split. Typically, when we work with CAD and FME, we try to explode everything so you can visualize it the way it looks when you open it up in MicroStation. And that can be good or bad, and it just shows you what data you're working with, which is most convenient. But if you're going from CAD to CAD, for example, you're writing straight back to DGN, you do not want to have any of those expanded or exploded. You want to keep them as their original geometry. So if you are writing from CAD to CAD, turn off expand name cells, turn off explode dimensions, turn off split multi-text. And then something to consider for your data set is whether the coordinate system is applicable. Hopefully your data provider lets you know what the coordinate system it's drawn in is. And in the case that it's not, some kind of possible things to do when you're bringing it into GIS. I think ArcGIS has some abilities sometimes to be able to import your data set and just kind of drag it around on the map to see approximately where it fits is one possibility. In FME, I think Dave did mention the local coordinate system setter. So you have a known point in your data set and you know approximately where it should be or what the correct coordinate system you want is. You can use that transformer in order to set the coordinate system. And we also have tools such as like the offsetter, rotator, and scaler to help you get your data into the right place. Anything to add there, Evie?
That sounds great. I don't really have anything to add on that.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
it's just good to remember about coordinate systems. It's not always included.
Yeah. My CAD teacher used to tell us, do not ever take CAD data without asking for metadata. And I do remember that. So
Yeah.
quick break for questions. I see a lot of good stuff coming in the questions tab. Dave, was there anything that stood out to you?
Probably the most interesting one was the concept of georeferencing, and you touched on that a little bit. The most CAD data you get is unfortunately not georeferenced, but especially when it's older. There are techniques you can use to georeference it. Newer CAD data, we do read the coordinate systems from both DGN and DWG files. So if the CAD data does have a coordinate system set on it, we will read that.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, coordinate systems are always a tough one, especially working with CAD. Just taking a peek through the questions. Evie, anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, there's lots of questions. I'm trying to read through them.
This is a very popular Q&A today, so thanks so much, everyone, for dropping all your questions in. Oh, and now it's probably a good time to note, we'll have time probably at the end to answer a couple questions as well, and we might stay online a couple minutes longer if we don't as well to get to a couple more.
Absolutely. And just a reminder that this is recorded, so if you're having internet connectivity issues, as I noticed some folks did, you will be able to check this out afterwards as well. And we will provide the workspaces.
Yeah, 100%.
Excellent. We'll move on for now. Keep the questions coming. Keep Dave busy. Thank you, Dave, for handling our Q&A today. Dave is very knowledgeable in CAD and GIS, so please do ask your questions. Okay, flip side, GIS to CAD integration. And as you can see, our slides are now in white, just to keep us reminded which side we're going towards. Not that there is any favor to one or the other. We love both. So some things to keep in mind when we're going from GIS to CAD. Now that we've got really clean topological data, what do we want to represent in CAD? So typically coming from GIS, we'll have points. And while we can write points to CAD, sometimes they're not very visible and may not be the most useful, which is why we may want to use cells. Things to keep in mind that we may not necessarily touch on in our demos today because there is a lot to cover in CAD, but things that you should want to think about to have ready are things like your cell libraries. Do you have custom cells you want to use? You will want to have access to it and set it into your DGN styler or your writer. Do you have any custom patterns you want to use? Do you have custom line styles? So these are things that you want to have ready to be able to write to CAD. And then finally, setting up a seed file. If you've come to any of our Autodesk typed webinars for CAD to GIS, the template file is the same thing as the seed file. Setting up your levels, setting up your line weights, colors, all of that will be kept as long as you match the level name when you're writing out. So unfortunately, I did not use a seed file in the demo, I'm sorry, but these are things that you will want to keep in mind even if we don't touch on it in the demos. Anything to add, Evie?
Yeah, thanks, Jovita. We don't touch on a lot of stuff, but we try to give a good overview of everything that is CAD to GIS and FME. Yeah, it's good to keep in mind these things. So yeah, this is my demo. So I will go into this. And we do have a article that this is based on, and it's the same data and everything. But so I will share that in the chat here. I will go over this demo. So what are we doing? We're writing tags and item types, and I will go over both of them just in case you still use tags. And we have GIS data, and we're writing it to DGN. Specifically tab. We have tab data. And the key is to use FME to read the data and write the data. And in the end, we have data that is written out to DGN with item types and with tags. So this is what the data looks like. In FME, it is a map info tab. It has a bunch of attributes here. I'm only going to transfer a couple of them with the item types, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of what we are working with. So I will share my screen again. I keep not sharing it. Okay, you should see my screen now. So this is the built out workspace. It looks pretty simple. And so all we're doing here is we have the map info tab file. It's previewing here. And then you can see all of the attributes here. And I am going to use an attribute creator to create the item types. So this is for park name. So you have to make sure that you name the parks.name. So I have parks as the item name, and then the attribute name is just name. So then I put in the attribute value here, park name, and then the item type here is 1 for string, and it's all in the documentation that we can link out later as well. And then this is another attribute here, it's tree count, and then I put in the tree count attribute. And 3 is integer, and that's it. So then you would keep on going like this for all of your attributes, but I only put 2. So I click OK. I run that, and so now we have this attribute here. This is the tree count, name, all of that is there. And then we write it out to DGN V8. So if we run that, I will go back to the slides. So this is what it looks like in MicroStation V8 with the item type. So you can see here the items, there's the parks, and then under parks, there are the name and the tree count when you select a feature, when you select one of the lines. And so, yeah, if you wanted to write tags, it's as simple as just enabling write tags to yes in the V8 writer. And then you would write out all of your attributes as if you would normally would in FME. Just make sure that all of your attributes are exposed and available to work with in FME. And then they would be written out. So this is what it would look like for MicroStation V8i for the tags. If you were to write them out, some key takeaways here is item types require at minimum 3 attributes to be created. The IGDS item names with the 0 in the brackets or 1 in the brackets. Keep going like that. And then the item name in brackets dot property name dot type and just item name dot property name. So that's a little example. I gave you what it actually should be and my example with parks.name and parks.name dot type. And then tags just need to have it enabled on the writer. So that's the documentation there. We'll put that in the chat as well. That's it for me.
Jumping in here, something helpful I learned recently on that IGDS item names. That's a list. The little squiggly brackets indicate that this is a list value. So that 0 is index 0, 1 would be index 1. And you can have different item types and different elements, of course. So each kind of set of elements, let's say if we're talking like roads or trees, roads would have their own item types, starting with that like element at 0. If you have multiple property types, so like 0, 1, 2, you can have 3 or more properties in that one item type. And so you will have more than one IGDS item names 0 in your workspace if you're writing multiple item types to different features. So something I found useful. Hopefully it'll be of use to you as well.
Yeah, that's something good to keep in mind. Yeah, it is a list. So yeah, you have to make sure to populate the 0, the 1, the 2 in the brackets. Otherwise, it also won't write out. Time for another poll. Are DGN tags still relevant in your work is the big question.
Yeah, I've just published that under the polls tab there. If folks want to head over. A few different options between not relevant and highly relevant.
We haven't been asked too much on item types or tags recently, so just wanted to check in whether folks still use tags in their work.
It looks like it's, for over half the audience, somewhat relevant. So we still have older DGN files to work with and occasionally need to create files with tags. But then we do have another third where it's not relevant anymore. And about 60% somewhat relevant.
We've got some knowledge-based articles on working with tags, so we can chat that out at the end here. We are still working on creating information or knowledge-based articles, tutorials for working with item types. So if it seemed heavy on item types, this is kind of the main resource at the moment for working with those, but soon to come.
Great, thanks everyone.
Demo 5, this is our last one coming up, and we will be looking at writing item types. I was hoping to create a workspace that tied together a few more elements. So our focus here will be looking at creating cells with item types on them, as well as using the DGN styler to set things like line styles. So we're looking at writing or reading from KML roads and GeoJSON tree points and writing out to DGN v8. We'll be creating a DGN file with a few different elements, as I mentioned, the cells and the line styles, as well as label annotations, I think is quite important when writing out to CAD, with our blocker being just kind of keeping in mind what we mentioned before about restructuring that data for a drawing perspective and what's useful for a CAD drafter or somebody working with CAD. And finally, we're going to use FME to bring this vision to life. With that, switching over to our screen share. So this looks like a larger workspace, but we're going to step through it and it will hopefully make more sense as we go. Let's take a peek at what we've got input. So we've got our KML reader with our road center lines. And I just wanted the road data set because I've got trees and it's not very useful in a drawing when you have a bunch of trees in the middle of nowhere. So I wanted to grab some kind of major roads. With my road types, I wanted to grab just the arterial roads. So we can use a tester to set up a simple test to look for just arterial roads, which is kind of a sigh of relief, fewer roads to look at. And then we're cleaning up some attributes here. So in this first blue bookmark, we're just filtering data. Scooting over to this yellow bookmark labeled 2, we're cleaning up geometry. And as you might recognize, this line combiner just to join these line segments into longer lines based on topology and attributes. We've got a reprojector here because I have my GeoJSON trees data set in EPSG. I think it was, let's take a peek. Opening up my feature information. So I am taking a look in the feature information window, and under geometry, there's my coordinate system. I'd like to expand this, but we've got EPSG 26910 in meters. So in order to have this data set come out to the same place, I am reprojecting my data. The DGN styler is of interest here just to show that you can set your line styles. You can set it by level, and this is where a seed file in your writer parameters will be really useful. So you can have that preset in your seed file and have this pick up that information to set the line style. Here I've just chosen from my available line styles. And finally, I'm using the labeler to create annotations. Something really fun about this transformer that I hadn't really realized before, we have a couple of different labeling options, and this one is really great for linear or polygonal features, in that it will create a kind of parallel to that line feature, which is what I want for roads. Let's take a peek at that. Zooming in, you can see, let me change this back into light background. For those of you who are used to Stamen, we've switched over to Stadia Maps. Let's turn this off for a second here. Anyways, we've got our labels. And Fraser Highway kind of runs diagonally across Vancouver. So you can see that we've got our labels ready. Taking a look at our GeoJSON reader, we've got trees as points. Turn my background map back on. And we've got a lot of information here. So I think early on, when you're working with data with lots of attributes, especially from GIS, if you want to improve efficiency in terms of running speeds, you want to extract data early. So you want to keep your attributes that you're interested in and drop anything that you're not interested in kind of early on in your workspace is always helpful. And because we've got points and we're writing to CAD, we're going to create cells. And I've got this lovely tree cell that's already kind of in my FME install library, this default V8 cells. And below that, we're creating annotations. So I thought something kind of interesting to have on our tree points would be some information on the tree species. Oh, I've got a lot of overlaps. This might be a next webinar in terms of avoiding overlaps. But I've got my English oak, my tree number, my heritage tree number, just to add some labeling. And finally, we're creating our item types. So the only difference here between mine and Evie's is that I've added a bunch of bulk attribute renamers. And in this case, I'm changing the string case where everything, all my attributes were previously in all caps with underscores. I was able to set all of them to full title case, remove the underscores, add a prefix with the item type name. So in this case, my item type is trees. This is replacing underscores, and this creates a suffix for dot type. So when I open up my attribute manager, I don't have to type in everything. I have these populated, and I just had to add the value for the type. You'll notice that Evie had used numerics. I actually typed out the full string and integer, and it seems to work as well, but I believe in our documentation, we do suggest using the integer value, like 1, 2, and 3, instead of string and integer, but I found it still works. Finally, we are outputting our levels. So I've got my roads that are line styled connecting to roads, my road annotations, trees, and tree annotations. So go ahead and rerun this entire workspace. And something we didn't touch on previously for anyone that's newer to FME is this translation log. And this is where you will do most of your debugging and understand what's kind of happened as it wrote out. I can ignore this because there were reader feature types I did not pull in from KML, including document and folder. And that was a decision I'd made. And coming back to that translation log, I can see that my translation was successful with 8 warnings. And I wanted to take a closer look at it. It's mostly to do with feature caching, as well as a renaming of my coordinate system, which I'm okay with. On my KML data set, I think it's just how FME reads it in. So let's take a look at our output. Demo 5 trees.dgn. And let's bring it over into, actually, let's open it up in the data inspector here, just for interest of time. Demo 5 trees, and checking that we have item types on. I'm actually also going to check expand name cells here, just for us to be able to see the geometry of the cell. So if I zoom in here and change this to dark, I've got my trees. They have my item type information. I've got my annotation offset by maybe a little bit too much here about my tree number and heritage number. And then I've got these roads just to kind of see approximately where my trees are located. So that concludes this demo. And we can move on from here as we've touched on this in the workspace and head into wrap up.
In summary, it really depends on your data going from CAD to GIS and GIS to CAD. What does your data look like? And then what do you want it to look like? Maybe we didn't touch on some custom line styles, custom patterns and cells. We didn't touch on 3D DGN or linkages, but hopefully we can answer those questions after the webinar or right now after in the Q&A. So
and let us know in the chat if there is interest for other components or elements in DGN that we didn't touch on. So keep that in mind for the future.
All right,
Yeah.
awesome. So before we head into, I think we just have another minute here of wrap up and some resources to share out, but I just wanted to come on to say, I know we are at the top of the hour, so if you aren't able to hang back for a Q&A at the end here, we understand, and hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining. All right, so with that, I will wrap us up here. So a little bit about us at SAFE. If you are newer to us, we just celebrated 30 years of working with over 25,000 organizations around the world, across almost 130 countries as well. We offer flexible deployment options. FME Form is the authoring environment where you build your data integration workflows, and automation can be provided in FME Flow, which is deployed on-premise or in your private cloud. And we also offer FME Flow deployed in a fully hosted cloud environment called FME Flow Hosted. Some resources for today to help you get started. Get our ebook, Spatial Data for the Enterprise. The link is there. Check out our FME Academy and knowledge base. Tons of great resources at your fingertips and free learning available. And then, of course, lots of upcoming webinars and on-demand content at safe.com/webinars. Next steps, if you'd like to get in touch with us to chat about anything data, info@safe.com, and experience the FME Accelerator. It's just a 90-minute course free of charge, and it's a great place to get started with the basics of navigating through FME. All right, and our community badge code and our brand new FME community. So you can redeem that on the right side. You just have to scroll down a little bit on the new community.safe.com. I'll also drop that code in the chat here so you have it. If you aren't a member of the community, also check it out. It's a great place to network with other users alike. All right, and with that, let us take a couple questions here live and maybe elaborate on a couple questions actually, because Dave's an absolute champion in the Q&A and I think he got to all of them in the text version. So that's been awesome. Thanks so much again, everyone, for your questions. I'll invite our presenters to turn on the webcams and we can take a look.
Wow, yeah, Dave got to all of them.
Dave, was there any to highlight from the set there of questions?
One that seemed popular was a question about FME and data interop. They are mostly the same, with the difference that data interop does not have all of the formats supported by FME, and that's kind of due to licensing issues and stuff. But most of the techniques you see displayed here for FME will work in data interop as well. And I guess the other thing I really like to point out is that these CAD and GIS webinars are done quite regularly, and we try to cover different aspects of the CAD to GIS workflow. So if you did see something you're interested in or you have something that you're interested in that didn't show up in today's webinar, please feel free to look at our back catalog. There are some webinars in there that are mind-numbingly technical that might have the answer you want. Others that are more lighthearted. So yeah, there's a great wealth of information there, and also amongst our community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've dropped a link in the chat side of things on an article to do with ArcGIS data interoperability and how that compares with FME Desktop or currently FME Form. So if you want to take a peek there, there's a little bit more resource on that.
All right. Yeah, just final call to our panelists. Any other questions we want to touch on?
I saw one question in the chat, not in the questions panel, but it asked, can the neighbor finder select candidates based on distance as well as layer or level? And yes. So I had a maximum distance of 75. In that, is very important to set that in the parameters of the neighbor finder, because it does select on distance. That is the whole method. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, I'm still scanning through the chat as well as the rest of the questions.
Yeah, adding into there, you can also do it you can approach it multiple ways. You could filter first to just looking at the levels that you're interested in and comparing, or you could do it inside the neighbor finder, I think with a group by, that you can focus just on that information that you're comparing. And if you don't have a coordinate system on your data set for DGN, then it would work on your file units. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Dave.
No, that's great. I should point out that that brings up another point. It usually happens more with GIS data than with CAD data, but within the workspace, FME is for the most part coordinate system unaware. So that if you're interacting two data sets in something like the neighbor finder, you should ensure that they're both in the same coordinate system before doing that interaction.
Yeah. I also see another question in the chat about why was there multiple separate neighbor finders in my workspace that I had demoed? And that was a choice by me. It was because I found that when I combined them all, some of them weren't, because the points and the lines were so close together. Some of the labels that I wanted to merge onto the points were merged onto the lines instead. And so I separated them beforehand to get rid of that error. But it really depends. This comes back around to the moral of the story, is that it really depends on your data, what it looks like, how close together your features are, and what you want to do with them.
And a minor segue, there was a really interesting question about leader lines. What happens if you have an annotation pointing to a feature, which happens pretty often in CAD? The answer is that it is tricky, and you will scoot the attributes along that leader line from the arrow to the other kind of point on that line in order to basically get your data as close as possible before using a neighbor finder. So that is the answer to that one.
Yeah, actually, that's techniques like that is one of the things that actually was covered in one of the earlier webinars in, like I said, mind-numbing detail. So I'll look through our back catalog.
I'd say a key idea when working with CAD is definitely use the documentation. I can't say this enough. We have beautiful documentation with lots of images. Thank you to our TechPubs team for their dedication in creating those examples. But definitely use it, because it will give you information about the different elements you're working with. And oftentimes what's overwhelming in CAD is the number of attributes. So I think somebody pointed out the kind of differences between FME geometry versus like IGDS type. And some of them are tied, so you can safely just work with IGDS attributes, and using that documentation will really help you figure out what to set and what to look for, especially if you're troubleshooting or debugging.
Okay, just to note for folks, if you do have any questions that come to mind in the next couple minutes, definitely drop those in the questions tab. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep an eye on it for a couple minutes longer here. But in the meantime, just a big thank you for everyone who tuned in and joined us today. We appreciate your time. We hope you got a lot of value out of this webinar today. And also to our panelists here today, our presenters who took the time to create this content. And Dave, thank you so much for all your help with Q&A. All right, and with that, I will wish you all a great rest of your days ahead. Thank you all for joining. Bye for now.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.